Okay, everybody, so we're going to look today at the t-test, what it is, how you do it, why it's used, and some basics on interpreting it. So some of the assumptions that we're going to make in this is that when we compare two sets of data, we're going to make an assumption that this data has a reasonably similar variance. To test that as a separate test, we're not getting into that. We're just going to make that assumption. Also, we're going to be doing what's called a two-tailed test. So what this is saying is we're not really trying to skew the interpretation of how different one set will be from the other. We're not going to make that kind of prediction. We're just going to see, is there a significant difference between these two data sets? We're also, as always, in any reasonable experiment, is that we assume that this data is generated from similar test conditions. We try to control the experiment as much as possible. So let's take a look at like the example out here. So we've talked a little bit about fire ecology. So let's say that there's some restoration going on of, say, a prairie community in, let's say, western Missouri that has, originally been prairie, and then it was farmed, and then they did tree farming or ran cattle or whatever, and they've done a lot of research, and the area historically truly had been a prairie, and they wanted to restore it, and there's like a very important threatened species of wildflower that is very much of interest to these scientists, and they've gotten a grant as part of the restoration of an overall prairie community that they work hard on bringing back this particular species that was historically highly associated with that community. So they've got a hypothesis going is that this particular wildflower species responded very much to occasional fire, and so that seed germination and then promotion of the plant was, if not dependent on a previous fire, at least highly benefited by a previous fire. So they've done 10 plots on treatment plots in one part of the study area where they have no fire. That's going to be like your control set. And say each area they work to seed it. They were, certain bulk amount of seed per acre. Maybe this is a half-acre plot for each one of these. And then after so much time, they count in the plot how many of this wildflower species come up. Then they have, in another area, they did a control fire, either right before they applied the seeds or afterwards or whatever, depending on what they predict was the germination needs of the species. And let's say that once again they were all half an acre, whatever, and they wait so much time, and then they see how many wildflowers of that plot have been established. So what a t-test is doing is fundamentally asking, are these two data sets drawn from similar means? So it's very rare that you're going to have in nature an control experiment where you have absolutely the exact same average data. But if it's not the same, to what extent is it truly different? To what extent could it not be drawn from chance? That truly the independent variable, in this case fire, has driven that difference. So the t-test works on a certain standard threshold called a critical value that we'll talk about in just a second to analyze the factors of the average of each set, the standard deviation that will square, we call that the variance, and then the number of data points in that set. In this case, each set has 10. So if you want, stop the video and maybe pull out a spreadsheet or by hand and get down these numbers and see if you come up with the data that I got here. You can do it on Excel or Google Sheets. If you do it by hand, that's okay too. So I'm about to move over to the second half of this marker board here, and let's put this data to work and use it to interpret the experiment itself.